One city, one country, two systems. Or at least, that was the sales pitch. After 156 years of British management, Hong Kong went back to China in 1997 under a 50-year autonomy deal. We're only at the halfway mark, and somehow the warranties already expired. Let's see how that happened. It's May 1839 in Canton, modern Guangzhou. China tells Britain's trade chief Charles Elliot to hand over his opium stash. No, not for that reason. They're gonna burn it. Fair enough. London was tired of bleeding silver for tea and silk, so they cooked up a plan. Become polite drug lords. China wasn't impressed. The empire responded the only way it knew, with gunships. It's like the DEA asking a cartel to stop and the cartel saying, "Nah, we'll invade instead." The British threw hands. Well, cannons. 2 Royal Navy ships versus 29 Chinese ones. The result? Not a battle, a demolition. China had wealth, but its weapons were from a museum. Industrialization had skipped town, and it showed. So when the British demanded Hong Kong in 1841, Admiral Kwanti couldn't exactly say no. The Treaty of Nanking made it official, a hostile corporate takeover with fancier uniforms. Then came the sequel, the Second Opium War. Bloodier and somehow even more humiliating. At Palikao, 50,000 Chinese troops charged straight into British and French fire. 2 Brits died. The rest celebrated by torching the Emperor's summer palace. Because nothing says victory like arson. By 1898, China had signed away Kowloon and the new territories, not because it wanted to, but because it still couldn't do much else. It was a negotiation with a cannon in the room. That stung for China. Still does. Heard of the century of humiliation? Beijing thinks it started here. Officially, that era ended when the Communist Party took over. Obviously, problem solved. Well, not quite. It didn't happen in Hong Kong. It was still a British colony. While the rest of China was learning about revolution, Hong Kong was learning that you don't put milk in Earl Grey tea. Today, Hong Kong makes up about 2% of China's economy. It sounds tiny, but don't let that number fool you. It punches far above its weight. About $600 billion worth of trade moves between Hong Kong and the mainland every year. It's one of Asia's most important financial centers. It even has its own currency and a stock exchange, the world's 5th largest by market cap. Not bad for a city that technically doesn't even run itself. And here's one of the great ironies. Hong Kong came under British rule through deeply shady means, but it benefited a lot. Britain wasn't just an empire. It was the empire. It was global trade's OG. Hong Kong was one of its ports. It moved mountains of goods and even more money. But it didn't just trade with Britain, it started to act like Britain. The accent got stronger every year, and the food? Well, probably just as bad. It became a free port, home to Western-style banks and institutions. They turned profit into an art form. The British barely interfered, partly because they believed in free markets, but mostly because they couldn't be bothered. That tradition outlived the empire itself. By 2012, a year that would soon mean a lot, the Heritage Foundation ranked Hong Kong the world's freest economy for the 18th consecutive time. Impressive, really, considering it was never truly free, just temporarily unsupervised. That's right, a conservative think tank in Washington, D.C. was praising a territory in communist China for being a freer economy than the United States. Hong Kong topped the charts in financial, trade, and business freedom, basically a paradise for money. Well, maybe not if you don't own half the skyline. How about the cultural differences? The Heritage Foundation also praised Hong Kong's high-quality legal framework and little tolerance for corruption, which, coming from a Washington think tank, is like being called modest by a Kardashian. Technically a compliment, but still kinda weird. The report rizzed up Hong Kong, the stable regulations and investor-friendly climate. That's the kind of business environment that makes billionaires take notice. And that wasn't luck, that was inheritance. As part of the British Empire, Hong Kong adopted the British legal system, common law. the system that brought the world fairness, due process, and about 3,000 different types of wig. Compared to China's old imperial system, it looked modern, structured, almost civilized, like the difference between a courtroom and a royal temper tantrum. Education took off, especially between 1887 and 1889. That was thanks to Colonial Secretary Frederick Stuart. He decided Hong Kong should have schools that looked more Oxford than Qing Dynasty. The ironies don't end there. The place that the British took by force, it became a refuge. People fled there repeatedly. Hong Kong welcomed immigrants from the mainland, and the mainland kept giving people reasons to leave. Famine, unrest, the occasional dynasty-sized identity crisis. So they came, because who wouldn't? Refugees poured in after the Qing dynasty collapsed in 1912. Same with the Civil War. But Mao's Great Leap Forward? That wasn't a leap. It was a faceplant. Millions landed in Hong Kong. The Communist Party likes to say Mao ended China's century of humiliation, but don't buy it. He just started a new one. His rule was more destructive than anything between 1839 and 1949. The Taiping Rebellion? Tens of millions dead. That's modest by comparison. Mao outdid every dictator in history. No one knows the real number. Best estimate? 45 million. Not through war, through management. Oh, if you like these geography grand tours, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I've spent way too many hours staring at maps to not at least earn a pity click. Anyway, where was I? Mao, that's right. The best thing that ever happened to China, at least according to Mao. His Great Leap Forward promised to drag China into the industrial age. Bold words, big dreams. The result? One of the worst famines ever recorded. It was a famine so man-made, it deserves its own trademark. Between 1 and 2 million more people died in the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s. Mao decided the country needed a loyalty check. Time to prove its love for socialism by purging the capitalist elements. Because nothing says devotion like public humiliation and mass chaos. The easiest method? Snitch on your neighbors, or your teachers, or your parents. Anyone who looked too comfortable. Millions were dragged into struggle sessions. What are those? Part political rally, part mob beating, part therapy session run by a sadist. It was mass psychotherapy if the therapist was actively trying to ruin your life. But in the middle of all that, Hong Kong. Around 2 million people fled the mainland. The British colony looked better than Mao's chaos, and somehow everyone won. The refugees found safety, and Hong Kong reinvented itself. Factories, finance, shipping. Desperation turned into an economic plan. It was survival with better branding. After World War II, Hong Kong got a glow-up. Immigrants from Shanghai kicked things off in the 1950s. The city turned into a textile hub. By the 1960s, it had graduated to electronics and plastics. Plug in, wrap it or melt it, Hong Kong's the place to be. But Britain was watching the clock. The empire was shrinking fast, and nobody likes to be the last one at the imperial party. After World War II, most colonies had already gone independent. By the 1980s, London had a new problem. The 99-year lease on Hong Kong's new territories was about to expire. Meanwhile, China had changed. Mao was gone. Deng Xiaoping had opened the doors to capitalism, just enough to let the money in. So in 1984, Margaret Thatcher signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration, a deal that said you can have it back, just don't ruin it. No word if she made them pinky promise. London agreed to hand over everything. The new territories, Hong Kong Island, Kowloon, even the parts it actually owned. It sounded generous. It wasn't. There was a catch. There's always a catch when an empire's involved. The deal was simple. Hong Kong would become a special administrative region, part of China, but not too part of China. One country, two systems. Nothing says unity like separate rules, right? No socialism in Hong Kong, they said. Capitalism would stay. The laws, the freedoms, the lifestyle. They would stay for 50 years. A bold promise from two governments that weren't exactly famous for keeping them. So far, so good, except the Joint Declaration never promised democracy. Not a single line, but British officials claimed they understood it would move in that direction. A bold assumption, They were dealing with a government that still censors Winnie the Pooh, after all. But the contradictions were obvious long before the handover. In May of 1989, 1 million people in Hong Kong marched for democracy, theirs and China's. They raised money, sent supplies, tents, because what could go wrong? Then the tanks arrived. Operation Yellowbird started, a smuggling network that did what the world's governments wouldn't: help. Hong Kong businessmen like Zhetou Hua weren't buying tents anymore. They were buying freedom. Protest leaders out of China, one by one. Britain helped too, not out of pure heart, but with MI6. Nothing says humanitarian aid like a spy agency. Operation Yellowbird saved over 400 people on Beijing's most wanted list. Hong Kong was a refuge, again. The city had a habit of being a safety net when China fell apart. The refuge days were numbered. Jiang Zemin had taken over China. He gave a British envoy the tour of the Great Hall of the People. He pointed at Tiananmen Square, at the tents paid for with Hong Kong money, and moaned like China was the victim here. London went along. China was growing fast, and Britain didn't want to be left out of the profit margin, so it played along. On June 30th, 1997, with Prince Charles looking politely uncomfortable, Hong Kong was handed back to China. The ceremony was televised worldwide, the end of an empire complete with subtitles. The future king wrote about it in his diary. Of course he did. He hoped Martin Lee would stay out of jail, but even Charles could sense it. Corruption rising, the rule of law quietly packing its bags. For now, things were okay. Martin Lee wasn't arrested yet, but there was an early sign of things to come. There always is. It's just that no one recognizes them. Hours after the ceremony, China's People's Liberation Army rolled down Hong Kong's streets. Nothing says smooth transition like tanks in your rearview mirror, but for a few years, Beijing mostly played nice. Then came the Basic Law, promises of democracy, universal suffrage, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, even international human rights law was there. All the right words. For a while, it seemed real, but the promises never arrived. Still haven't. That's why the people in Hong Kong wish the British had stayed. Beijing wishes it had used a shredder. As soon as the British left, protests began. Every July 1st, Hong Kongers took to the streets. The Civil Human Rights Front called for democracy, free speech, minority rights. You know, the stuff you ask for when your government insists you already have them. The demonstrators started small. Hope still lingered. Maybe China would change, modernize, catch up. In 1997, 1 in 5 identified as Chinese. By 2007, 1 in 3. Progress, apparently. Then came 2019. Only 11% still called themselves Chinese. The rest? Just Hong Kongers. 71% said they weren't proud to be citizens of China. The numbers told the story. It was a long time coming. The post-1997 quiet could never last. Hong Kong doesn't do calm, just intermissions. It only took 6 years for the cracks to show. Mainland and Hong Kong, the same country, different planets. And those July 1st protests, about to explode. 500,000 took to the streets in 2003. The issue? A proposed anti-subversion law. It banned subversive groups, expanded police power, and protected state secrets. In China, that could mean literally anything. The protests lasted all summer. Hong Kong eventually won. Regina Ip, the security chief everyone loved to hate, got sacked. Chief Executive Tung Chee-hwa buried the bill. The people had beaten the system. Turns out, the system was just catching its breath. China has a legislature, but it's not like a democratically elected one. Most of the candidates for the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress have nothing to do with the people. In theory, it's an election. In practice, the party writes the guest list. Everyone else smiles politely. But in 2007, it did something unexpected. It pretended to care about democracy. 4 years after its last disaster, the Standing Committee made a big announcement. Hong Kong would get a democratic election for its chief executive by universal suffrage. Just not in 2012. 2017. Progress. Kind of. 2012 still mattered. The world's freest economy title was now a relic, and CY Leung took office the old-fashioned way, being selected through an almost 1,200-member election committee, chosen by roughly 6% of voters. It was democracy, but only if you squint hard enough. It didn't take long for him to show a glimpse of the future. The government rolled out a plan for patriotic education. That's mandatory classes for you and me. What did that involve? Well, the Communist Party was perfect. Democracy? Not so much. Tens of thousands of students filled the streets. One of their leaders was a 15-year-old Joshua Wong, who went on a hunger strike. His name will come up again. The people of Hong Kong won this time. CY Leung had to back down. So he backed down, canceled a trip to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, dropped the curriculum. Turns out, nothing terrifies a government faster than students who can read. But things were about to change on the mainland. Someone was keeping a close eye on things. 2 months after Hong Kong's students took to the streets, China had a new leader, Xi Jinping. On the surface, it should have been fine. Xi had a tough childhood. His father was a senior Communist Party official, until he wasn't. He was a victim of the Purge. Not the movie, the Cultural Revolution one. Xi spent his youth in a labor camp, digging ditches and apparently learning all the wrong lessons. Maybe try a paper route next time. Less ideology, more pocket money. Once Xi got power, he didn't dismantle oppression, he jacked it up on steroids. He crushed dissent, muzzled the internet, and turned China into a surveillance state. Not just any surveillance state, the world's largest. 494 cameras for every 1,000 people. Hyderabad, India comes second with 79. Big Brother isn't watching. This is Big Brother's bigger brother. Just 4 months into Xi's rule, and Beijing was already testing the boundaries. The legislature reinterpreted its old promise of democracy. Always a bad sign when politicians start using quotation marks in policy. Chow Xiaoyang, the law committee's chairman, promised universal suffrage, but only for candidates who love the country and love Hong Kong. Which sounds romantic, then you realize the relationship is abusive. Hong Kongers didn't buy it. They'd seen this movie before. The pro-democracy groups had a solution. If the Communist Party wouldn't let them vote, they'd hold their own election. A 10-day poll in late June of 2014. The question? How should Hong Kong's next leader be chosen? Over 760,000 people participated. The result? Hong Kong's residents wanted full democracy, free and fair elections, and they meant it. Over 500,000 took to the streets on July 1st. The symbolism hit harder than the vote. Beijing called the election an illegal farce, which, coming from a one-party state, is pretty rich. They had their own plans, and they didn't waste time in showing them off. On August 31st, 2014, the Communist Party's top legislature confirmed the plan. Sure, Hong Kong could vote for whoever they picked. 2 or 3 candidates, all needing approval from a 1,200-member committee first. So it was democracy, with an asterisk. Beijing insisted it was following the basic law. Universal suffrage, they said. Not a universal choice, a tiny distinction, and a loophole wide enough to roll a tank straight through. The storm was building. The wiser ones in Hong Kong were already opening their umbrellas. When it hit on September 22nd, it didn't bring rain. Instead, it was a typhoon of yellow ribbons and fury. Students from 20 universities took to the streets. There were yellow ribbons everywhere, on wrists, shirts, backpacks. Their protest started as a class boycott. Always a bold move to make skipping school sound like a political strategy. But it was only the beginning. Leaders like Alex Chow and Yvonne Leung said it was a transitional point. The ribbons would soon be joined by red blindfolds. Symbolic, sure, but also practical when your government's pretending it can't see you anyway. The next day, the boycott moved to Tamar Park, the heart of Hong Kong's central business district. Scholarism joined in, led by Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow, both wearing blindfolds. And then, on September 28th, it all went wrong. But the moment that gave the movement its name, Occupy Central with Love and Peace, a protest with the nicest slogan imaginable with the worst timing possible. 80,000 protesters faced off with Hong Kong's police outside the central government offices. The police used pepper spray. The protesters used umbrellas, which was a bold move, but the symbol stuck. Ordinary umbrellas became icons of defiance, bright, fragile, and everywhere. They covered bridges, filled public squares. They turned the city into a gallery of resistance. By early October, Hong Kong's major districts were occupied. The world had its image, freedom, but under an umbrella. But this time, CY Leung wasn't going to back down. Xi Jinping was watching. The Hong Kong authorities vowed to clamp down. So, the police upgraded. They went from pepper spray to tear gas. It was the first time they'd resorted to it since 2005, their first use since 2005, and it wouldn't be their last. The city split. Protesters clashed with pro-Beijing groups in Mong Kok and Causeway Bay. The occupation dragged on until December, Hong Kong's longest standoff, all over the meaning of one word: autonomous. On April 18th, 2 days before everything wrapped up, Martin Lee was arrested, ticking off the one item still haunting Prince Charles' diary. The umbrella movement claimed a partial victory. Chow Xiaoyang's Love the Country, Love Hong Kong plan went down the following year. Apparently, you can't legislate love, not even in China. The problem was, nothing changed. The protesters blocked Beijing's fake democracy plan. Who can blame them? But the system stayed the same. The 2017 election was business as usual. A tiny committee of loyalists picked Carrie Lam, who quickly proved that popularity wasn't part of the job description. Xi Jinping responded with his own declaration. Any move that threatened the national sovereignty or security would cross a red line. Less of a warning and more a promise. The Red Line promise would happen, but in a few years. For now, Hong Kong's government just wanted revenge. The umbrella movement cost an estimated $5.2 billion. Weirdly, some of that loss was good news. Mong Kok's triad gangs lost 40% of their income. Shame. Tourism was up 5%. Turns out, democracy protests make decent photo ops. Of course, real businesses got hit too. The city's trams lost 2.3 million riders in October. Pacific Place Mall's sales tanked. Someone had to take the fall. Martin Lee did, for a while. Then everyone went back to pretending this solved something. Alex Chow spent time in jail, spending 7 months in a prison sentence in 2017. It was later overturned. Chen Qinman, one of Occupy Central's founders, became a favorite target for Mainland hackers. He spent so much time sweeping his room for bugs he could have been in a Cold War spy film. In 2019, he was arrested and spent 11 months in prison. His colleague Benny Tai got irony as punishment. Protesters gathered outside his home. Then he was sentenced to 16 months in prison for good measure. Joshua Wong wasn't spared either. 6 days in jail in 2018, another month in 2019, freedom in Hong Kong had basically turned into a revolving door. 2019 was the year Hong Kong went Hong wrong. The umbrella movement looked like a warm-up act compared to what was coming next. China's authoritarianism had leveled up. Hong Kong wasn't squabbling over classroom lessons or who got to pick the chief executive anymore. That was yesterday's news. With Xi consolidating power, Hong Kongers were no longer fighting for reform. They were fighting for identity, for the right to still be Hong Kong at all. On August 30th, police arrested Agnes Chow for joining an unauthorized assembly outside the police headquarters. She was one of hundreds that day chanting, "Police thugs, shame on you." Honestly, that's the kind of slogan that tends to age badly under authoritarian rule. The arrests were part of a wider purge, the latest chapter in a long-running crackdown. And the irony? All this unrest had started with good intentions, the push to punish a murderer. On February 17th, 2018, a 20-year-old pregnant woman from Hong Kong, Poon Hyo-wing, was found murdered in her Taipei hotel room. Her boyfriend, Chan Tong-kai, confessed to the crime. It was an open and shut case, right? Except it wasn't. He got 20 months in prison for money laundering. Hong Kong couldn't charge him with murder. It was the wrong jurisdiction. Taiwan told Hong Kong exactly what happened. Hong Kong arrested him, but their legal system hit a wall. There was no extradition treaty, no legal loophole, nothing. Hong Kong couldn't sign one. Why? Beijing insists Taiwan doesn't exist. Hong Kong could strike trade deals, sure, but not justice deals, because even murder needs to respect Chinese bureaucracy. Political and legal bickering lasted through the entirety of Chan Tong-kai's prison sentence. When he was released, he begged for forgiveness, not just from Poon Huing's family, but from all of Hong Kong for the unrest his crime had caused. Chan Tong-kai's crime didn't just horrify Hong Kong. It inspired paperwork, the kind that could only come from a government that thinks word count equals justice. In February of 2019, while Chen was still in prison, Hong Kong proposed a new law, one with a ridiculously long name. The Fugitive Offenders and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Legislation Amendment Bill 2019, aka the infamous Extradition Bill. On paper, it sounds reasonable. The chief executive could send fugitives to places Hong Kong had no formal extradition treaty with. But there was a catch. Of course there was. For the first time, suspects could be extradited to mainland China, the one place no one in Hong Kong had ever wanted or trusted to send anyone. Beijing's bigwigs loved the bill. Naturally. Hong Kongers, not so much. Opposition groups warned that it would drag the city into the mainland's justice system, the one where fair trial means we'll tell you what you confessed to later. One country, two systems was about to become one country, one problem. And then the noise began. On March 31st, 12,000 people protested against what they called the evil law. Joshua Wong was there too. Apparently, he's allergic to quiet weekends. It was like a snowball. The protests just kept growing. 130,000 people marched on April 28th, the biggest demonstration since the Umbrella Movement. By June 9th, police admitted it had ballooned to 270,000. Protest organizers said over 1 million. When your crowd estimates differ by 3 zeros, you know it's serious. 3 days later, the protests turned into a citywide standoff. Tamar Park became a battlefield. Traffic stopped. Tear gas filled the air, including around first aid tents. Nothing screams public safety like gassing medics. The government called it a riot. Everyone else called it a Tuesday in 2019. The protesters even had a shiny new slogan: 5 demands, not one less. And those demands? The protesters laid them out. 1. Scrap the extradition bill. 2. Stop calling them rioters. 3. Free the people you arrested. 4. Actually investigate the police. And 5. Carrie Lam resigns. And, democracy means actual voting. Reasonable stuff. Unless you're the Chinese government, in which case this list reads like a terrorist manifesto. Guess how many were met? Go on. 1. On June 15th, Carrie Lam suspended the extradition bill. For anyone who doesn't speak politics, that means paused until you forget about it. Hong Kongers weren't buying it. The next day, 2 million people hit the streets, in a city of 7 million. That's not a protest, that's filing a complaint in person. July 1st, another 500,000 people flooded the streets. The biggest march in Hong Kong's history. Protesters broke into the legislature. They ripped down portraits. They channeled their inner Banksy and covered the walls in graffiti. Democracy might have been banned, but at least Hong Kong got a makeover. The movement didn't stop. By September 4th, Carrie Lam finally bailed. Hong Kong's government withdrew the extradition bill. It was officially confirmed on October 23rd. The same day, Chan Tong-kai, the murderer who started it all, walked free. But Hong Kong doesn't do fairy tales. There was no happily ever after, just a sequel no one wanted. Carrie Lam refused to meet the protesters' other demands. Instead, she offered something else. It's an unconventional sales pitch, especially when customers are setting things on fire. The backlash was instant. Protesters trapped her in a stadium for hours during her open dialogue. 3 weeks later, lawmakers booed her out of her own policy speech. Nothing like being popular. So she did what any panicking leader would do. She dug up colonial-era emergency powers. Nothing says modern governance like reviving imperial law. Her big fix? An anti-mask law. Halloween aficionados everywhere were devastated. It was a move that would look very 2019. Authorities tried to silence the movement. How? By disqualifying Joshua Wong from running for office. At this point, it was just a game of political whack-a-mole. One arrest, 3 new leaders. At the end of October, Hong Kong got economic data, and it was terrifying. The city's first recession in a decade. A few days later, a pro-Beijing legislator was stabbed in the street. A week after that, a student protester, Chao Chilok, fell to his death during a police clearance. By mid-November, the movement peaked. The scenes looked like something out of a medieval chronicle. You know, if medieval Europe had tear gas and laser pointers, which, to be honest, does sound pretty epic. Students called for a general strike. Then they went from 0 to 100. They built catapults, real ones. No confirmed reports of trebuchets, though. Debris onto the railway lines and highways. Caltrops blocked roads. They even made bows and javelins. It was the most authentic Game of Thrones cosplay ever. And how did the authorities respond? They invited everyone around for tea and a friendly discussion. No, they looked up overkill in the dictionary and thought, that sounds good. Police unleashed enough tear gas to smother the skyline. Rubber bullets, beanbag rounds, sponge grenades. This wasn't a protest. It was a war zone. And it still wasn't over. Students set up a new battleground at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Police surrounded the campus, but instead of storming it, they went old school. They laid siege. They broke out the greatest hits, even more tear gas, rubber bullets. Sure, it was like the Oprah meme. You get a concussion, you get a concussion, and you get an extended stay in the ICU. Even medics were detained for trying to treat the wounded. International law? Never heard of it. Hospitals were packed with protesters. 1,100 were arrested. It was the government's first big victory, if you can call tear gassing teenagers a dub. But like teenagers everywhere, the protesters pushed back. Then came New Year's Day of 2020. Tens of thousands marched. The police joined. So did the tear gas. Hong Kong's celebration came with the usual party favors, panic and pepper spray. And then Beijing's got a blessing in the form of a virus. COVID-19. Forgot about that, huh? The Communist Party called it a curse in Wuhan. In Hong Kong, it was practically divine. God works in mysterious ways, and apparently has a side gig in epidemiology. Business in China had stopped dead. Hong Kong had its first case of COVID on the 22nd. Protests were replaced by panic. The government limited gatherings to 4 people, the least effective protest ever. It was perfect. A virus had done what tear gas couldn't. The world was distracted. The toilet paper wars were underway, and that's when Xi made his move. That red line he'd warned about? Try red wall. Beijing brought back the 2003 anti-subversion law, now with 50% more authoritarianism. Beijing didn't even bother with Hong Kong's legislature. It just passed the law of the People's Republic of China on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Catchy title, rolls right off the tongue. Even comes with a compulsory arrest warrant. The usual crimes were banned. You know, subversion, terrorism, saying things out loud. A new security office appeared, special judges, and a chief executive required to be a patriot. Job description: obedient, smiling, and house-trained. Pro-democracy groups like the Civil Human Rights Front were dissolved. The July 1st marches banned. 47 activists arrested. Joshua Wong got 4 years for subversion. That's having opinions to you and me. Martin Lee, Hong Kong's father of democracy, Martin Lee, was arrested again. He was collecting jail terms like Pokemon cards. This time, 11 months for protesting. That was later suspended. He lost his title and stopped giving interviews. You know your system's broken when the guy who invented democracy in your city can't even talk about it anymore. The law even extended beyond China. Foreigners could face 10 years for helping terrorists. So technically, watching this video could be illegal. Congrats, you're an enemy of the state. Then Britain got involved. It had to. Anyone born in Hong Kong before 1997 could live and work in the UK for 5 years. After that, they could apply for citizenship. Nearly 145,000 people took the offer. Who doesn't love trading tear gas for rain? London said it was the least we could do, which, historically speaking, checks out. For Hong Kongers who couldn't get out, the future's grim. Carrie Lam, public enemy number 1, is gone. Her replacement, John Lee, a man so loyal to Beijing he probably tastes boot polish 24/7. He was the only patriot China approved to run in 2022. Technically an election if you don't know what an election is. Now the government has a new enemy: soft resistance. Lee claims it's real and it's everywhere, lurking, which sounds less like policy and more like a horror movie. Where's it hanging out? Independent book fairs, children's books where police are wolves, and somehow organ donor lists. Turns out, preferring to keep your liver inside your body is resistance. But not everyone is so happy. Businesses are complaining. Turns out, authoritarianism is bad for the balance sheet. Hong Kong doesn't even make the Heritage Foundation's Economic Freedom Index anymore. It's now part of China, and that came in at 157th in 2023. At least there's room for improvement, yeah? Beijing insists it's about security and about ending colonial humiliation. London says it's about values, which is cute, coming from a country that owned people. John Walden, a former British official, summed it up. We have, in the end, handed over a free people to a despotic communist regime. That's the same free people that Britain once ruled as colonial subjects. Hong Kong's story isn't over. It's a reboot. Different empire, same script. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.